Okay, so I'm going to just give an overview on pregnancy in prison, and this is just a snapshot. There's so much information out there. But what I want to say before I start is that it's really essential that we remember that this is all about motherhood. And I think sometimes when we talk about the criminal justice system, people get so caught on the word prison, criminal, offender, that they completely dehumanize women who are in prison, and specifically everything to do with motherhood. And as you said, Sue, it's a time often of excitement, of anxiety, of anticipation, where community is absolutely essential. So pregnancy in prison in the UK. In the last 2 years, 2 babies have died in prisons when their mothers went into labour in their cells without medical assistance. That's not normal. That's completely traumatic. And the campaign was launched by Level Up and Birth Companions and Women in Prison in response to these 2 baby deaths, because we heard the news that not 1 but 2 babies had died in prison in the space of 2 years, and yet the Ministry of Justice and the government were not making any changes to the fact that pregnant women were still being sent to prison despite there being alternatives. So we launched a campaign off the back of the first baby death that was published. That was one in Bronzefield Prison. And we've just been building momentum ever since, because since we went public, so many people have come forward and said, I can't believe that pregnant women are in prison. They just shouldn't be there. So I'm going to play a short video in a sec, and it also features Suzy's voice, but this campaign has been founded with women who were pregnant in prison, and their experiences and their demands are at the centre of it. I'll play the video shortly, but just a really key contextual point is that the majority of women in prison are there for short sentences, for things, often for less than 6 months, for things like shoplifting and theft. And so when we look at actually what prisons are there for, they're often holding some of the most vulnerable and very poor people in society, and it's quite cruel actually that's our societal response. And Maria, I know that you'll speak in your research. I was shocked myself when I read that one of the women you spoke to was 30 weeks pregnant when she was sent to prison for shoplifting while she was homeless living in a car park. And I think this campaign fundamentally is just about demanding humanity for mothers who come into contact with the criminal justice system. But 63% of women in prison are survivors of domestic abuse. And it's just really, really important as well that we remember this isn't just about birthing. Obviously, the concept of going into labour in a prison cell is every pregnant woman's worst nightmare, and it happens. And it's happened, and it's resulted in tragic baby death. Not to mention long-term trauma for the women. But also, even if you don't give birth in prison, even if that doesn't happen to you, the stress of being pregnant in prison, which I know Suzy will speak to, and the long-term trauma and the long-term impact that this will cause on you, on the development of your child, is so disproportionate to any crime that anyone could ever commit, really. And I think what's really important to emphasize is that you might hear, 3 months, 6 months. Well, if someone's in prison for a 3 to 6 month sentence during a pregnancy, that time is absolutely crucial for fetal development. And if they're in prison during their due date, if they're in prison when they have their birth and they lose their baby, it's just so unforgivable. So something that we really want to focus on as well is just the fact that this isn't just about birth, it's about the health of a woman's pregnancy overall. But I will stop talking briefly and play you this video. So you should be able to see it.
When I was 7 weeks pregnant, I was sentenced to prison.
I was in a dorm, which was horrible. It's a lot of women, 1 bathroom.
When I arrived, I didn't eat for 5 days.
You don't have access to fruit and veg.
The lunch would be a packet of crisps, sausage roll. The bigger I got, I started to get hip pain, because when you're laying on the cell beds, they're basically metal with like a really, really thin mattress.
Just imagine giving birth in your cell, in your room, and nobody being there. You can go to prison for not paying your council tax.
A lot of the women in there were at the mercy of domestic violence situations. When the nurse came, she asked me to lay on the bed, move my legs apart so she could examine me, but she didn't want to close the door. And we have male guards.
1 baby has died. 1 is 1 too many.
she is my entire world. She was with me through everything.
We're still people.
So that was a campaign film. I know, so you're going to send it out in the resource pack. So just a bit of the campaign. We are demanding an end to prison sentencing for pregnant women and new mothers in the UK. Right now, astoundingly, there's no statutory duty for judges to actually take a pregnancy or a baby into consideration when they're making a sentencing decision. Now that's for a sentence or a bail decision. And the reason I say bail, so, you know, when you're immediately arrested, there's a decision made on whether you'll be held in prison until your trial or you can go home. And what's really, really devastating is that the young woman who lost her baby in Bronzefield prison was actually there on remand. And the day after the baby died, she was sent home on bail, which just goes to show, you know, she didn't need to be there and things could be very, very different if she wasn't there. So what we're saying is that there is another way, because there just is. When a woman is supported in her community, she can make the best choices for her child, and prison will never be the best start in life. So we launched this campaign. It's gained so much traction and media attention, and there's brilliant researchers out there. Maria is one of them, who will speak about her recent research, but I encourage you to really look at the work of Laura Abbott, of Lucy Baldwin, Rona Epstein, and Shona Minson. They've done great work on this. And the reason I'm really keen to speak to midwives is because the position of the two biggest kind of voices of midwifery in the UK, I believe, doesn't go far enough. And I think you could have some huge influence on changing government policy. Sorry, there's cats having a fight. I don't know if you can hear that. Because fundamentally, prison is not a safe place for anybody. The very design of prison is based around isolation from community. It's deprivation of your liberty. And if there's anything that pregnant women need, it's community and access to healthcare. And you will never, ever get access to healthcare psychologically, physically, when you're in a prison cell. And it's really interesting that these are the positions that the RCM and the RCOG have, that the RCM say that all women in prison or custody must have equal maternity care to those women on the outside. And that position in itself is redundant, because you will never have equal access to maternity care when you're locked inside a prison cell. Even if there are midwives on the prison site, they're definitely not there overnight. And even if they were, if there's an emergency, you simply cannot get out quick enough, and an ambulance simply cannot get in quick enough. And also, I think what's really sad, and I know, Suzy, you'll speak to this as well, when you're in prison, you can't have anybody accompanying you to your appointments. And as we know, that is such an emotional part of pregnancy, that milestones that you can't do again. So yeah, I would really encourage anyone to write to the RCM, to write to the RCOG, just to say, you know, will we change our position on this? Because it just doesn't make any sense. So the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the position is women in prison should have access to high quality maternity care that's equitable to all other women living in the community, and the prison system must ensure that imprisonment does not compromise maternal or neonatal outcomes. And again, it doesn't make sense. Ultimately, prison will never, ever, ever, it will always compromise maternal outcomes. It will always compromise the health of anybody, even someone who isn't pregnant. So it's really important that we just recognise that these positions not only, I think, almost uphold the prison system as it is, because, you know, as much as the Ministry of Justice might say on paper that they're aiming to make maternity care equitable, it just will never be by the nature of prisons. But also, I think it does a disservice to the role of midwives in the UK. And obviously, you know, Maria, I know you'll speak more to this, but actually what this is about, it's about care, and it's about the care of babies and children. And as the voice of midwifery in the UK, I think you could have huge influence on government if you change the position to just draw a line and toe the line and just say, no baby should be born in prison, no pregnant woman should be in prison. We are the experts on this. You actually need to listen to us. So finally, these are 3 things that you could do. We're nearly at 10,000 signatures. As I said, you could write to the Royal College of Midwives, the Nursing and Midwifery Council as well. They actually don't have a public position on this, or if they do, I haven't seen it. And the RCOG, just to demand they shift their position on this. And we have a rally on Monday, the 28th of March. It's a Mother's Day rally, but it's the day after because obviously Parliament don't sit on Sundays. In midday, and it's BYOB, and that is bring your own baby. So if you have a baby, if you have a baby, borrow a baby, come along. But also, obviously, midwives and birth professionals are absolutely welcome there. Because we're going to be making a stand outside Parliament just to say this is about mothering, it's about mothers and babies. Treat them with respect, treat their health with absolute respect, and get them out of prison. So please stay in touch. The petition, if you're listening but not watching, is at act.welevelup.org/pregnant in prison. And I know Sue, you'll send it out in the resource pack.
Absolutely.
And if you want to get more involved, just get in touch. So our email address is hello@welevelup.org, and it would be fantastic to hear from you. But I will hand over to Suzy now, because Suzy, you were pregnant in prison. You are the authority on this, and I know that people will be very interested to hear your experiences.
Hi. Yes, I was pregnant in prison. I found out I was pregnant as I was being booked into reception. So I was just as surprised as anybody else, because when you're being administered into prison, they make everybody take a pregnancy test. So this was like, it was like I was processing a lot of things as I was on remand as well. So it's like, I'm on remand, I'm having a baby, I have a son already. So that was one of my biggest worries in prison. But as I got into prison, I was brought to the first night suite, which is kind of like, I call it the honeymoon part of prison. So it's not very realistic to what the rest of the prison is like. It's very quiet, it's very calm, which kind of lures you into kind of like an unrealistic sense of security, because you go from feeling all like you're worried, but it's so totally different to when you get into the actual main part of the prison. After I left the first night suite, I went into one of the other landings. So I was just on a general mixed landing, and I was in a double bunk. And I remember my roommate, first kind of alarm, went through my prison notes, and she discovered that I was pregnant, and told the other ladies, and they were saying to me, you shouldn't be on the top bunk, because I was on the top bunk bed, and they were like, that's not safe, like you should be somewhere else. So they were advising me that I should speak to the prison officer. So I told one of the prison officers, like, I'm pregnant, I don't think I should be up here. And he was looking through my notes as if he was like, this was the first time he's hearing it as well. So they moved me into a dorm, which is like a room full of 6 people. The difference is I'm just on the ground now, but even then I was faced with lots of kind of hostile behavior, kind of not the things that you need in the start of your pregnancy. Although I'm quite a strong character, I must say, the first a week or so on that landing was kind of some of the hardest moments of my life. Obviously, lots of people come from different backgrounds and like a mix of ages and personalities, just very much clashing. So I asked to be moved again, because another prisoner told me that there actually is a pregnancy wing, which I was also shocked to discover. So finally I get to the last stage and I'm at the pregnancy wing now, but I'm in a dorm. The pregnancy wing is a mix of vulnerable people as well as pregnant people. And I remember, and I was in a dorm again, which according to the prison is that pregnant people shouldn't be alone, and you should be in the group of women. But it just happened that when I got to this dorm, they were very well established. And I remember one night the lady was shouting at me to turn off my light, but I was so scared I couldn't. And the little light over your bed was something that you were allowed to keep on. And I remember we were arguing because I was refusing. It's like I've already been stressed by enough people on different landings, and I'm not turning this off. And then in the middle of the night, I was carried out by prison officers, and put in an empty single cell by myself. And I remember that night I cried and I cried and I cried. And then the head of our wing, she came to speak to me, and she told me she was going to take my television away. So apparently when you misbehave, although I don't feel like I feel like standing up for myself was seen as, I learned very quickly, they very big on authority. So like standing up for myself was almost like I've done myself a disservice if I should have just turned off the light and been quiet. So she told me she's going to take my TV away, and I cried and I cried, and I think she panicked. The ladies were saying to me, basically, there was so much gone on before I arrived to the landing that she gave me back the television because she was worried that I was going to be in like a lot of distress and it affect the baby. Throughout the next couple of weeks, I was discovering new things, but from the ladies on my landing. So as I got really big really fast, although I was at the beginning of my pregnancy, I was about 12 weeks and I looked about 32. So it was very uncomfortable. As the video says, you're sleeping on like a really thin mattress on a single bed. But I was really one of the lucky ones, as some of the people in the prison didn't have support, whereas I did. So I was asking questions like, how do I get a pregnancy pillow? How can I get myself a duvet? Because I arrived at a time where it was still quite cold. It was March, April, and the weather was really cold. And they were saying to me that you had to be an enhanced prisoner to buy a duvet. They don't provide duvet, so kind of like the blanket they'd give you in A&E is the blankets we slept with.
Wow.
And the heating is on subjectively, so depending on what the prison think is sufficient, you don't have a personal heater in your bedroom. So I had to apply to be an enhanced prisoner before I could have access to. They used to use the Argos catalogue and order from there, but you had to make an application first before you could even go that far. Your family weren't allowed to hand you in stuff like duvets and sheets and things like that. You had to pay for it, which I thought was really strange. Like, if the prison couldn't afford it, but your family could, why couldn't you? And then it came to things like when my cravings and stuff had changed, the prison food was very poor. Like, food would turn up with, like, potatoes would turn up with dirt on it still, like the fruit and veg hadn't been washed, which some of the ladies from the kitchen told me that it hadn't. And the prison relies on a lot of prisoner help. So it would be prisoners cooking, prisoners cleaning and stuff. And so that generally would be a job that the ladies from the detox wing take. But could you imagine someone's detoxing off of drugs and they're sweating and their mind's not in it, but they still need the money because they don't have the same family support as other people. And so they're like the prison's cutting corners in basic things that you would think, like washing your rice and washing your vegetables, and the food standards were quite low. And I get it, I'm a prisoner, so I mean, this is not the Savoy Hotel. That basic things that I would have just expected, like how do you mess up pasta? But then you could buy your own food, but it wasn't exactly food, it was more like tuck shop. So there's no refrigerator and stuff, so if your drinks come, they come room temperature. So if your rooms are hot, your drink's hot. So there wasn't a lot of, if there was fruit, there wasn't a lot of fruit choices, and they were very, very overpriced considering all of the resources are open to the prison. They were buying from, I think they call them Happy Shopper, like the brands like Happy Shopper. And it was just, everything was just shocking me. So I can't even though I can afford to provide my baby with the right nutrition, the stuff that the prison is offering doesn't allow me. And then I had a night where I wasn't feeling well, and that's the part where I was just feeling like I've had enough. So I remember I had pains in my stomach, so I rang the buzzer. They were asking me, like, how am I feeling? Would I like to come out and take a walk? They were kind of deliberating like what they're supposed to do. So in order to leave the prison in times of emergency, they have to, before they can let you out your cell, they have to find someone else to cover the landing. And then when they let you out your cell, even if there is someone on site, they have to call ahead, to the hospital. They have to find someone who's able to drive and come as an escort, because you need minimum 2 people to take you to the hospital, depending on what kind of prisoner you are. And the 2 people that took me that night were very, very agitated, because it was almost time for them to finish work, and my medical emergency meant that it would mean that they would have to stay for longer. When you go to the hospital, you're still handcuffed. So I sat in the reception at about like 11 p.m. at night, sitting in handcuffs, while the rest of the A&E looked frightened while sitting in a field waiting room. And I remember a little girl, mum, saying to her, like, you can sit there, and she was like, no. So like this, it's just like the embarrassment, because I would stare too if I saw anyone sitting in handcuffs, because why are you handcuffed? But the prison told me it's because there's lots of exits, so it's in case I escape. Although this is a medical emergency, the last thing I'm thinking about is running away. And then we saw the doctor, and the doctor was basically saying, because it was a weekend, there's not much they could do, and I should come back on Monday. And it's almost like it was like music to the prison officers' ears. They couldn't wait to pack up and leave. And like for me, I was more upset because I couldn't ring my son's dad, so I had no one to sit with, and it's just that invasion of privacy, because I can't speak to the consultant by myself. They're a part of everything. I don't have any privacy, although now we are in a private room. And then I remember I started bleeding, and I was telling the doctor, and he was saying, there's nothing we can do, as it's an early pregnancy. So I remember I spent the rest of the weekend on the way home feeling like I lost my baby. And the prison officer turned around to me in the van, and she was saying to me, sometimes things are just not meant to be. And I just spent the whole weekend crying in bed. And I remember the next morning, another prison officer who started their shift was like, you can't be in bed all day, you have to tidy up. So it was evident that they hadn't told her what had happened. So she's spending time chastising me, telling me what she is and what she will and won't do if I don't get out of my bed and tidy up and have a shower and stuff. And I didn't eat the whole weekend, but the lovely ladies of my landing, once they realized there was something wrong, they came and they mopped up my cell, and they brought me food and stuff and washed all my plates. And honestly, to think that all my support came from strangers was quite sad. And even like when I spoke to my son's dad, it was on borrowed time. It's like when I came back from the hospital, I couldn't really say much anyway, because all I did was cry. But I had to go back to my cell. I couldn't have as much time as I needed to like get support from my loved ones, because whilst you're on remand, you can have a visit every day if there's space. So it's like there's no one I can sit and talk to. And after that, it was just things like, as I got bigger, seeing things like your portion size. So I remember saying to the prison officer, like, I'm still really hungry. Could I have more? And they were saying to me, no, like the portion sizes that you have are exactly what you're getting. Like you get the same as everyone else. It doesn't matter if you're pregnant. So on a plus side, being on the landing, some of the pregnant people were on methadone. So that methadone affects their appetite. So what they used to do is push their sandwiches through my door. So when the doors were locked, because you're not allowed to share food with other prisoners also. So they would wait until that the doors were locked, because most of them were the cleaners. So they would pass their food through the windows because they knew I was hungry, which was really nice, but still quite sad, because it's just like loads of things are going unnoticed. And then it was the things with the clothes. So as I said, my pregnancy, it felt like week to week I was morphing into someone new. So in prison, I only allowed a certain amount of clothing, but like as my partner handed something in, my belly got bigger. So it's like 1 week everything's amazing, the following week my belly just doesn't fit anything. So we were going back and forth, and the prison was saying to me like, oh, I should be lucky that I could be able to use the hand in hand out service. But it was like, well, I will be sitting in my underwear if I don't. It's not because I'm trying to take advantage of of this because nothing fits. So it's like you can't try anything on. So the only time majority of people hand in stuff is at visits. So I'm waiting at the visit for my partner to come, for them to go. They have to go through your list. So I remember there was an instance where there was too much stuff on my card. So they were like, no, you have to hand out the stuff first. And it was like, the stuff sitting upstairs doesn't even fit, but that. So it was just like this, the stress of going back and forth it's not like it wasn't common knowledge. You can see on my file that I'm pregnant. You can visibly see, honestly, like I've never thought that I would say this. I was very, very big, like week to week. It was astonishing how much I grew. So it was just things like this was stuff that I feel like goes missing, because I'm aware that, everybody thinks that you do the crime, you do the time. And I also used to feel like that. But to see so many reports and stuff of people giving birth in their cell, and you just to think that those were the people that were strong enough to talk up. But when I arrived at prison, I was met with someone on my landing who gave birth in their cell the previous year before I arrived. And to think that there's lots of people who this is happening to, they're having similar experiences, like going into labour, having births assisted by prison officers and stuff, is such a wild thing to hear, that prison officers and commissioners are not seeing the value in having a midwife and a health visitor present at all times. And I'm very appreciative to the midwife that did come for the few days she did, because in prison the midwife isn't 7 days a week. She's part-time for a couple of hours, so she's seeing everybody who's pregnant or just recently given birth, which is a lot of workload. And I feel like it's things that the prison aren't willing to accept. Like they think that the midwife is going to be the health visitor, counsellor, and things like that. And those things are unrealistic. And I joined Janey with the campaign. It's so sad to think my son is 8 now. So to think that 8 years later that they're still failing women, and they're not supporting, they don't think this is valuable, like to release women. And I do understand, like I've read all of the pros and the cons and people's concern, but babies aren't prisoners, and they deserve the start as everybody else. And the prison service just cannot offer that. And they're showing us time and time again that it's just not, their way is just not sustainable or safe. And the baby's safety should come first before anything.
No, that's good. That's great, Suzy. Thank you so much. That's really very, I think the way you expressed it was so fantastic, because I've got a completely different picture of what life was like, and not of the little everyday things that really a huge impact. Fantastic. But Janey, you just wanted to finish before we go on.
So I'm sure Maria will speak more to this, but
yeah,
what Suzy said just reminded me, just in terms of midwifery and how that role is really disrespected in the prison system.
Yeah.
So, as we all know, in a hospital setting, it would be illegal for a nurse to determine whether someone is in labour. However, this is what happens in prisons all the time, and we know that this has happened in the baby death cases, and in another one of the women who Suzy and I have been working with on this campaign. It was a nurse who was called to assess whether she was in labour. And she was indeed in labour. It took 5 hours for her to ring the buzzer and then actually finally be let out of the prison. But I think it's just a really important point to note for this particular audience, in terms of actually that is such a key and simple thing.
Actually, that's really important, Janey, because when Suzy just said about the midwife, I thought, maybe things aren't quite as bad. But actually that does make a big difference, because I was a nurse and then a midwife, but as a nurse I wouldn't have wanted to make the decisions about whether a woman was in labour or not. It's quite a different skill set. So thank you for clarifying that one.